Clinton campaign came out swinging today, responding to the Times report detailing the State Department's role in the sale of uranium mines to Russia. A spokesperson attacked the integrity of the piece and said no one, quote, has ever produced a shred of evidence supporting the theory that Hillary Clinton ever took action as Secretary of State to support the interests of donors to the Clinton Foundation. In another memo published online, Clinton's spokesperson goes on to say that Hillary Clinton was not involved in the State Department's review of the sale of the Russians, and that the Clinton Foundation donor featured in the piece, quote, never spoke to either President Clinton or then Secretary Clinton about his company. Joining me now, Michelle Goldberg, senior contributing writer at The Nation, Eric Bullard, senior fellow at Media Matters. All right, Eric, what do you make of it all?
The uranium story is interesting because there's a lot of stuff missing. I mean, if you look at that deal, when you read it from the Times, you're like, oh my gosh, quid pro quo, we got a smoking gun here. That deal had to be approved by the White House, the State Department, Commerce, Treasury, Energy, Nuclear Regulators Commission, Utah nuclear regulators. The idea that Hillary Clinton controls all those entities because someone paid her husband for a speech and she decided she was going to change U.S. policy?
So there's this board. The way the process works is that there's this board that's intergovernmental board that has different stakeholders that have to sign off on these deals.
Right.
And the State Department was one of the members of
one of many
of that board. Okay.
Right.
So here's my feeling, Michelle. There's a bunch of distinctions to make here. So let's just focus on this uranium deal, right? To me, what the Clinton people did in pushing back, I think, was smart in that they focused on the strongest version of what the article might allege, which is essentially quid pro quo.
Well, the article doesn't really allege anything.
Right, that's right.
It hints and it implies and it juxtaposes things, but the only clear allegation is about the failure of disclosure, and I think that that's the big problem here for Clinton.
Right, explain that.
Okay, so. Yeah, there's a hint of a quid pro quo, but absolutely
there's basically like here's a quid and here's a quo, and they sort of happened around the same time.
But they're right when they say that there's no evidence, and in fact, the evidence of the New York Times story I think is a little bit weaker than it appears. You know, some of this stuff about Kazakhstan came out in a 2008 story in the New York Times, and then there was a piece in Forbes debunking some of that, particularly the allegation that Clinton had flown in with the Canadian mining magnate whose name I'm not going to pronounce correctly.
Right.
And so, but in fact, they hadn't flown in together, at least according to Forbes, which got his flight manifest. Clinton was flying with Ron Burkle. The mining magnate was already in Kazakhstan. You know, not that this makes them look so much better, but it does suggest that this wasn't kind of him bringing Clinton along to sweeten the deal. So already some of the facts, I think, are, like I said, a little bit weaker than the Times presents them. The one thing in the piece that I think the Clinton camp has to explain, I think it looks really bad that they haven't even tried to explain, is the fact that they had an agreement with the Obama administration to publicly disclose these donors, and they didn't. And so not only is there the kind of question of, well, what were they hiding, but they just, on their face of it, violated what was a clear rule.
And it's also not rebutted in the response, right? I mean, the response just doesn't address that.
Right, it doesn't, because I think the larger takeaway from that article is we caught the Clintons in a quid pro quo. We caught the Clintons selling U.S. policy for a speech to Bill Clinton, but it's not there.
Well, okay, but here's the thing that drives me nuts, okay? Yeah. So the strongest version of this in the Clinton Clash book, from what I've seen of the excerpts, you know, is this idea of quid pro quo. So in the Columbia Free Trade deal, right? It's like Columbia makes a donation to the Clinton Foundation, the Secretary pushes for a Columbia Free Trade Agreement. Right. That seems pretty ridiculous on its face because the Columbia Free Trade Agreement is already a policy priority. It's going to happen independent.
Exactly.
What does seem clear though is there's a lot of in the Clinton Foundation, right? There's a lot of people who have interests before the State Department who are donating, right? And given what Hillary Clinton was walking into, shouldn't there have been unbelievable care taken to put firewalls, to have ethics lawyers flagging stuff, to voluntarily, proactively disclose, to point out possible conflicts of interest?
Well, look, I mean, you know, they raised $2 billion, and there's no evidence yet of any criminal wrongdoing, anything that even be...
There's a standard below criminal wrongdoing. There's a standard of the perception of conflict of interest.
That's not where this goes. Fox News wants federal investigators today. This is part of the larger plot, always, always, always. It's always based on criminality.
Okay, so this is what I wrote today, is that people use the phrase Clinton rules in two different ways, right? They use Clinton rules to talk about the Clintons don't think that they should follow the rules. And then there's Clinton rules, which is the way journalists consistently kind of throw out normal evidentiary evidentiary standards and going after the Clintons.
Right.
And both of these kind of rules exist, right? Like the Clintons regularly cut ethical corners and are like a little bit sloppy and there's conflicts of interest. And there is this kind of long-standing journalistic vendetta against the Clintons that kind of allows people to exaggerate and follow these sort of right-wing conspiracy theories down all sorts of rabbit holes and blind alleys, to mix metaphors. And so it makes it very hard. You sort of get epistemological whiplash trying to figure out which sort of Clinton rules we're dealing with.
So here's what I want, right? I mean, like I've been to Davos. I've covered Davos. I've been around reporting on some of the circles in which these folks move, and these are circles in which, like, yeah, people, like, lots of people give money to the Clinton Foundation, right? And lots of people have business before the State Department, and like there's going to be a Venn diagram, right? So there's going to be a plausible case to be had about, like, well, was one connected to the other, right? My point is that in those, you have to be above and beyond under those conditions, right? I mean, like, I don't understand why you wouldn't put in the most rock-solid ethical safeguards, why you wouldn't have, like, compliance officers who are flagging this, why you would violate your own agreement with the White House on disclosure.
Even short of rock-solid ethical safeguards, at least follow the rules that you've agreed to.
Well, again, I go back to the larger picture of this infrastructure, and I'm just going to make a quick side note. What is in the news today in terms of this permanent infrastructure of fishing expeditions? Hillary Clinton is going to be asked to testify in Benghazi in June about the attack. 30 months after she attacked.
That's right.
So the Republicans have this blueprint for the Clintons, and yes, for the Obamas too. You set up this permanent infrastructure, you get in the right-wing media, and then you lure the New York Times to chase it too, and it becomes this permanent.
But here's my trap in the same way.
And here's my question, though. You say lure the New York Times, and I've seen you on Twitter sort of attacking them on the sort of alleged partnership, or I guess it's not alleged, a partnership with the author.
They're going to appear on the Fox News special this weekend.
So
going after the Clintons.
But the point here, though, is that, like, this does seem a legitimate piece of journalism, and I don't think they got anything wrong. I mean,
this uranium story left we talked at the beginning, they left all kinds of context in terms of who approved that deal. If you read that story, at the end you think Hillary Clinton changed U.S. policy midstream because someone paid her husband for a speech. That is not even remotely close to what happened.
Can someone explain to me, and again, like, Bill Clinton can do whatever the heck he wants, but, like, the other thing I thought when I read that article was, like, why wasn't there someone being like, hey, Bill, maybe you should just turn down the speaking engagement? Like, we don't need the $500,000.
Well, we don't know. Maybe they have. I mean, he is by far the #1 draw, and he has been for a decade. Maybe
no, but I'm just saying, like, with his,
that specific one.
I'm saying the Russian bank comes in, and it's like, okay, well, some format or process where you say, okay, this Russian bank wants to pay $500,000. Okay, well, what are they up to, right? And then someone who says, you know what, actually, it's probably best if you turn down this $500,000. $500,000 is a ton of money, right? To say, like, don't take $500,000
for you and I.
Right. But at the same time, like, these are not people that are, hurting for cash generally. And I don't know why that also sort of drives me crazy about this, but I just feel like it's one of these things.
Why leave yourself even?
That's it. It's like one of these things where it's like, because of the permanent infrastructure you're talking about, because they knew, because fine. Respond to that, right? This was all they talked about in Hillary Clinton's confirmation hearings. So I was going back through the transcript. All they talked about was the Clinton Foundation stuff. They came up with this agreement. It's not like you couldn't see this coming, I guess is my point.
Look, the Republicans have made it a priority, certainly a year ago, that the Clinton Foundation was going to be their top priority in terms of opposition research. And here we are talking about the Clinton Foundation as the #1 opposition research. I don't think that's by accident, but I understand your point, your original point, in terms of setting up a divide.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about it that I think is interesting is, and we've been going through all this archival tape of the Clintons and, with this Hillary Clinton from Millennials. Is like at a certain point there becomes this sort of background din during the Clinton in the 90s of, like, scandal, quote unquote, somewhat real, a lot of it not, that it's almost like it's like living next to a train station where, like, seriously, it's just like it ends up becoming this sort of atmospheric thing.
And now we're kind of remembering, like, oh, this is what's coming for the
But then it's just like, oh yeah, like someone comes into your house and, like, you live above somebody, you're like, wow, that's loud. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Michelle Goldberg, Eric Bullard, thanks for being here. All right.